that is putting this event on.
So thank you, Sagar. I am Jagatpreet. So first of all, I am the president of Northeastern Sikh Student Association, but this event has been is going to be done like not just by me. It's like a contribution from many other members, and I would like to first thank all of them, and then I'll start with this farmers' protests in India. So. like who is like we will be discussing here the following things: who is impacted, what are they protesting for, and what are their demands, what is the current situation, and what role we can play. um, so before I get into the farm acts of that are recently passed in September 2020 by Indian government, I would like to go through the farming demographics and what would any farming law what would be the effect of the scale of the farming laws and who are being affected. This is deliberately done to understand uh, like who is what a typical Indian farmer is, what is their annual income. We also want to get an understanding and relate with Indian farmers, and it will put us an objective picture before we set out to discuss the farm acts. So let's see some numbers. 70% of our population do farming and allied activities in India, which is equivalent to 779 million lives, which is actually, if we have to compare it with American population, it is 2.37 times of American population. And let's categorize the farming population into uh, five categories. And this is due to Agriculture Census 2015-16 Government of India. They categorized it into five different things, and this was based on how much land they have. So there are 86% farmers, or 806 million farmers who only own less than 2 hectares of land. A hectare is just 1 hectare is just equivalent of one football running track field or a rugby field. And all these farmers who are small and marginal, they are under debt, and they are under the highest debt. After that, like if we see semi medium and medium, they comprise most of the other rest of that farming population. They are also under debt and non-profitable. So now let's go deeper into what these farming acts are. Before I describe the new Farming Acts 2020, I would like to discuss what was the initial scenario before these acts. So a farmer with their farmers produce would go to mandis. Mandis are actually government owned big warehouses where farmers are allowed to sell. But the system in mandis is there is a licensed commission agent which acts as a middleman between the farmer and the mandi. They they actually set the deal and uh, takes a tax cut and then sends the rest of the money to the farmer. This is how the conventional system worked. But now the new Farming Act, which is Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act 2020, what it is giving us, it is adding on to some new players, which is private buyers and individual players. How it will be allowing farmers produce to be sold is through a contract. There will be no commissioned agents. Like if a farmer wants to sell outside mandis, they can sell it, and it is through contract. There will be no tax levied on the produce, and the farmer will get the money straight away. And then next comes what would happen if there is a dispute, if someone is not following the terms and conditions of the farming contract. What would happen? That comes in the second act, Farmers Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. This act provides the a dispute resolution mechanism in which the farmer or the other party can go to a subdivisional magistrate, which is a bureaucrat, and that subdivisional magistrate has a conciliation board, which is comprised of the members of farmer side as well as the private buyer side, and they have to resolve that issue at that place. There is no provision of going to a civil court in this Act. And then if we see the third act, which is Essential Commodities Act 2020, in this act, what happens is this is an amendment to Essential Commodities Act 1955. Earlier, there were actually restrictions on some essential commodities, which were 23 in number, and these restrictions were imposed on those commodities, agricultural commodities, so that fair prices can be ensured to consumers, so that there is no hoarding or illegal activities like that. The current act relaxes those conditions and also also reduces the essential commodities list. So uh, what would happen here is like private buyers are allowed to hold the food stock or farmers produce in large quantities. So this is all in all a fact-based. What are the main provisions of Farm Acts 2020? Now, in the next, uh, uh, here we will be discussing what are farmers' demands due to these protests. So the first segment is demands related to Farm Acts 2020. The first one is repeal all these three new formulas, make minimum support price and state procurement of crops illegal right. So I would like to clarify here minimum support price. In mandis, when farmers went on to sell their produce, they were given a minimum support price, which is they were ensured that this price would be at which they can sell. They can sell greater than that, but this is the minimum that they will be getting it at when they will be selling at money. But that was only for a few crops or like few agricultural products. So they wanted to be a illegal right. Third one is assurances that conventional procurement system will remain, which means mandis should not be uh, eliminated from the system or they should not be deregulated. The fourth one is dispute resolution, provision for going to civil court, not just a bureaucrat. So they want if a case arises that there is a dispute, uh, not just this SDM level, uh, jurisdiction level is required. They also want a provision to go to a civil court. And let's go to the second segment of their demands, which is related to efficiency of system and subsidies. So they want to implement Swaminathan panel report and peg MSP at least 50% more than weighted average cost of production. The second one is cut diesel prices for agricultural use by 50%. And third one is abolishment of the Electricity Ordinance 2020. Let me explain. So MSP here again is minimum support price. So these demands, which are outside the Farming Acts, were some demands which were long-standing due for the farmers, because this Swaminathan panel report was passed in 2006, and these subsidies or these system level efficiencies are not yet implemented. So they are asking for a backlog of 10 years. So what they're asking is increase the current price of MSP by 50%. Also, they want some subsidies on diesel prices because diesel is required to run tractors and uh, and run combines and other machinery in agricultural activities. Another is electricity ordinance. So recently, government has passed and reduced subsidies on usage of electricity. Electricity is required to pump water and give it to crops. So this essentially increases their operational cost. So they want this abolishment. And then the next set of demands is related to stubble burning. So farmers in certain segments or certain geographical regions of India have uh, produce wheat and rice. So after the harvest of wheat, what happens is the the stock. There are things like the stubble from the wheat harvest has to be burnt. Like there are no provisions, there is no cellar, and farmers they do is they burn it, and that causes a lot of air pollution in the regions of Delhi and NCR. So recently, government has criminalized that activity, and actually arrested certain people, like certain farmers who are burning that stubble. So the demand is that we should decriminalize stubble burning, and also release those farmers who are being arrested for this. This is coming from another, like, I want to give some context here. Uh, Farmers also want that if the government doesn't want them to do stubble burning, they should also provide incentives or mechanisms to send the stubble to some other places, like, because they do not have any warehouses to keep it, and they have to cultivate the next crop. So these are the major demands of the farmers. Now let us go to um, another constitutional demand. Center should not interfere in state subjects, and the decentralization should be in practice. So Indian government structure is federal, partly federal and partly state. So in that regard, uh, farming or agriculture is a state subject. It's not a center subject. And by making these acts, Farm Acts 2020, uh, it is seen that, like, center has taken responsibility of the state subjects, and their demand is center should not interfere in state subjects, and the decentralization should be in practice. So all these are the major demands. Let's go to the viewpoints. Like, we have tried to be as balanced as possible in this presentation, and we are providing both the farmer's viewpoint and the government's viewpoint. uh, I would say, like, the government is thinking in this sense: the best case scenario, the farmers are worried about the worst case scenario. So let us discuss issue by issue on each of them. So first is contracts. Farmers' concern is contracts will be one-sided, as farmers have less bargaining power and small farmers do not understand legal issues. Whereas the government thinks contracts will provide a means of assured income. And why do they think that is? Because the contracts can give an options trading thing for agricultural commodities. Let us look into details and what evidence do we have in this part. So, is this contract farming a new thing? It is not a new concept. It is still there in Indian agriculture before these acts. So, and we will look into how beneficial is contract farming. So, giving examples like PepsiCo, McDonald's, Reliance, Life Seeds, Nestle are all doing contract farming. Let's look at a specific example of PepsiCo. PepsiCo is procuring potatoes in a district called Sangrur in Punjab, which is the northwestern geographical region in India. Uh, so the good point is, due to their involvement, and since this is an industry, they have introduced efficient and labor-saving farming methods. And this has led to crop diversification as well as export of commodities. So this is a good part of a corporate being involved in a contract farming. Whereas the downside is they have very strong contract terms, which requires grading and quality requirements, as well as when they provide certain sets of fertilizers or pesticides to maintain the crops, they are actually in their contracts mentioning that the cost has to be borne by the farmer. When I'm saying the grading and the quality requirements, their requirements are because this company is procuring potatoes for making chips, potato chips, and they want a certain sized potato, and they reject the other lot. So it's a quite aggressive, I would say, quality requirement. So the next one is only educated farmers understand the terms and conditions of the contract and actually keep the written contract. Other farmers actually do not know, or not aware of the written contract. They just are doing it. So, and these contracts do not allow to sell the produce in open markets. So there are positive sides and there are negative sides uh, about the contract farming. But if we look at how open this will make, like, will contract farming make um, um, allow the farmers to go to open markets, the this is a very closed contract. Like they are not allowing it to do that. So let us go to the next issue. Is open market good for agriculture and reducing restriction on essential commodities? Farmers' concerns. No taxes outside mandis will eventually deregulate mandis. The real losers of this effect will be small and marginal farmers. Whereas the government think more choices to sell and more options to produce, which will eventually increase farmers' income. Uh, so the farmers are worried about like if since there's an option of purchasing outside mandis and there is no tax, so this is going to reduce states' revenue and which will deregulate mandis eventually. Even if and therefore uh, the small and marginal farmers who will not be able to sell outside will be the real losers. Uh, so if we go to the next part, reducing restriction on essential commodities, farmers think that this will promote hoarding and reduce purchase prices. Whereas the government think this promotes investment in cold storage facility and logistical infrastructure. So let us look into a state-led deregulation of mandis in Bihar, which happened in 2006. So these are this is the summary of what happened at that time. So P. Sainath, which is he's a noted journalist and founder of Archives of Rural India, which is a digital platform for the voice of rural people and farmers. He observed that private firms only tend to buy when the prices were low. They never bought when the prices were high from the farmers. And there was no significant increase in the income of farmers, no improvement in agricultural infrastructure. So this is what history tells us, which is actually validating that the concerns of the farmers are real. And let us look into another example, which is privatization of sugarcane industry 1998. Here, farmers are so after the privatization of sugarcane industry in UP, Uttar Pradesh, again a northern state in India, and UP is well known for sugarcane produce. So farmers after so many years are still agitating in UP for fair prices, and there is no substantial rise in income. So privatization didn't play a good role in getting those fair prices, and again farmers' fears or concerns are sounding real. So I will, like I put it as if like these are failed projects and were led by state. Let us look into this issue of minimum support price. Farmers concerns, farmers will lose MSP sooner or later due to deregulated mandis reducing their income. Small farmers' limited knowledge on price dynamics can be exploited. Government's view is farmers will get MSPs in mandis. Like government is trying to say that even if we are providing another option, this current system of MSPs in mandis will still continue. That's what the government view is. And they are going to create price information portals which will help them get better price. But the farmers think here that because there will be no tax collection, the mandis will be deregulated eventually, some in some or the other way. So they are going to lose MSP even if the government promises it. Now it is not going to be there because of the way the economic works and because way the revenue structure works. So let us look into some examples like where the MSP benefited and where the where. So if you look at the average national income, monthly income of an agricultural household, it is 6,426 rupees. However, like in Punjab and Haryana, if you see that that's a green number, and these are the states where MSP is actually practiced. 65% of wheat and rice, which is being procured in these states, is due to MSP. And MSPs have benefited farmers of Punjab and Haryana to get better income than others, which is 3 times more than the average income of other farmers all over India. So it is these farmers who are going to be affected if these mandis are deregulated, and not just since we have seen like it is the small and marginal farmer who is going to be affected, because that comprises most of the farmers. And removing MSP will eventually reduce their income. So like there is if MSP is removed, the MSP should not be seen as a wrong thing. Like this is helping Punjab and Haryana farmers. So what is the meaning of all this? What I've shown you in numbers on in examples. So let's look at the big picture again. Let's assume there is a 20% chance of farmers fears to be true in the future, which the history says there is a good chance. We have evidences from 1998 and 2006. What would it mean in that case? It would mean that affecting annual incomes of 150 to 160 million farmers and reducing their income. So, shouldn't a policy or a farming act which affects a huge population be passed in parliament with a proper debate with all stakeholders? Shouldn't farmers, big or small, deserve at least the right to being heard when their livelihood is at stake? Shouldn't they have the right to protest something that affects their livelihood? I think the farmers have answered all three questions with a resounding yes, and they have peacefully protested about these farming acts for 2 months from September to November. However, like the government ignored their protests, after which they marched towards Delhi. And I think that's where the Sharon will be explaining you the current situation and taking over the presentation. Sharon, let me know like when you want to move next.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Sharon, and we can move on to the next slide, Jagat. So now you've heard what's happening, what the issue is. So let's look at what it's resulted in. Farmers all over India have come together in the Kisan Mazdoor Ekta Andolan, which is basically a farmers and laborers united effort to make their situation better, or at least not let it get worse. It's a diverse movement with people from all over India, including the states of Bihar, Rajasthan, Haryana, and Punjab. And there are 400 to 500 farmer unions from all over India who are supporting this cause. There are also transport unions, which are representing over 14 million truck drivers who are also participating. This has led to 200,000 to 300,000 farmers to converge to Delhi borders. It started as a protest within states, particularly in Punjab. There were sit-ins and such, and when the prime minister didn't acknowledge their protests, it resulted in a Delhi Chalo movement. And now 250 million people did a strike on November 26, 2020. And in the days following that, it resulted in police violence. So this is not just a Sikh or a Punjabi movement. It is a peaceful protest being put on by people from all different religious communities. We can see in this picture, there's Muslim communities providing food to protesters. In this picture in the middle of the screen, we can see that there are people who are very obviously Sikh and people that are very obviously Muslim, and the remainder who may be Hindu. And this has resulted in gender norms changing a little bit. With more men at protests, women are having to take over farming duties that typically men would have done. So can we move on to the next slide? So this mass movement that's affecting everyone in farming states has had a very strange response from the government and the media of India. So there's been major suppression of the protests. There's been use of police force through water cannons and also tear gas and lathi charges, which is basically, for those of you who don't know, beating protesters with sticks. And to discourage more people and supplies arriving at the protest site to support the protest, so like food, hygiene materials, things to occupy their time, people were sending tractors and trolleys full of supplies to the protesters. And to discourage this, the government actually went through and ripped up roads, which is not just a horrible thing to do for the lack of protests, but also economically, it is devastating for India. And there's also been a lot of propagandizing from the government and the media that supports the government. Cabinet members are portraying this protest as misled and misinformed, and they're being given a platform on media sites that protesters aren't necessarily talking to. Protesters are putting out their own form of media. They recently came out with a newspaper of their own. They are putting out what's going on at the protests through their personal social medias, but they're not talking to mainstream media platforms and newspapers and such. So ministers are being given a platform on the mainstream media sites to further their misled and misinformed idea. In fact, the Union Cabinet Minister of Agriculture actually said that this protest is an exception and limited to one state. But we can see that it is definitely not limited to one state, and it is not an exception. Most farmers are involved in this protest. Next slide, Jacob. So as far as media coverage goes all over the world, in India, there's a lot of misinformation. There's this push that this is actually a secessionist movement, a Khalistani movement. The protesters are anti-nationals, and that these protesters are actually hired or bribed to protest, that they're not actually protesting. It's just to make the situation look worse and make the government look bad, which is, again, not the case. We're seeing through personal social medias and things like that. In the European media, it's mostly only being covered by BBC and mostly only by people of Indian heritage, which shows again that the European Union is not taking these protests seriously. In the US media, it's not being reported much, and when it is, it's being reported in op-ed style rather than in the straight news section. There's not, and all these op-eds are also being written by people of Indian heritage. And the reason we have an issue with this is because we don't need the Western world to take a stance on the issue. We need the Western world to take notice of the issue, because we need to protect these protesters from further police violence. India has a history of human rights violations, and through media coverage, we can ensure these violations don't happen. But if Western media doesn't cover it, the Indian government doesn't necessarily know that the Western world is taking notice of what they're doing. So next slide. And there are prominent people, prominent educated people who have come out in support of these protests. Sukhpal Singh, who's a professor and former chairperson of the Center for Management in Agriculture, is saying that investments don't come due to a change in law, but due to incentives. So again, he's saying that forcing the agriculture market into a free market isn't going to make more investments in the industry. It's not going to make companies support small farmers. They need an incentive to do so. Otherwise, they will economically exploit these farmers. And Kaushik Basu, a former chief economist of the World Bank, is also a professor of economics at Cornell. So again, another very qualified person, has studied the new farm bills and has called them flawed and says that they will be detrimental to farmers, and that the agriculture regulation needs to change, which farmers agree it does need to change, but these new laws will not help the farmers. Next slide. So how can you help? You know what the issue is, you know that it's coming from credible sources. So what can you do sitting all the way here in the US? Well, first, you can stay informed and help inform. You can join us in the movement. You can join us and help us in our efforts, or you can individually participate, put things out on your social media, share credible news sites, ask your media sites to promote not promote the issue, but give exposure to the issue. And you can give support through funding. Khalsa Aid is a fantastic organization that accepts donations and is directly aiding the protesters. They've given a lot of essential items to them, as well as things to occupy their time while they're sitting at the borders of Delhi. You can stay up to date on fundraisers on our Instagram. There's a QR code there. You can scan that, or you can just type in our handle and follow us. We are going to be putting up a fundraiser through the NSSA. And other healthy ways to protest, you can take part in social media rallies. In particular, Tractor to Twitter has been one that's taken the focus, or you can reach out to your government. If you text Go Punjab to that number, it'll ask you a few questions, and you can send a letter to your House representative asking them to take a stand on the issue. Or you can call your representatives and ask them to publicly make a statement of solidarity with the farmers. Again, this is just to ensure that there isn't any further police brutality. It's not asking the US government to take a stand on the issue because they can't. Under the UN agreements, they have to respect the sovereignty of India. So we are not asking the US government to take a stand. We are asking them to keep an eye on the protests in order to ensure that there's no further police brutality. There's a link right there. I don't know if we're going to post the PowerPoint, but if you just type in www.house.gov, you should be able to find who your representative is in order to easily contact them. And next slide. So that's it for our presentation. Thank you for joining. Thank you for this platform. We're going to open it up for questions and discussion. I know I kind of rushed my part of it. I just wanted to make sure that we had enough time for discussion. And